from this point of view, once they kind of lock in to, sorry, I'm using Sidfield terminology. I should just shoot myself. This episode is being brought to you by ScriptUp, which are expert story and script consultants. They're listeners of the show.
Being fans helped their cause, but what got them across the line is the fact that they offered us use of their services, and you and I just finished a script that we needed independent feedback from. We got an amazing detailed report from them, but for me, what most sort of coverage and competition and feedback services lack is that actual back and forth and to and fro on stories, and ScriptUp builds into their feedback an actual Zoom call, which was fantastic.
So if you're looking for an experienced, independent insight into how your story is working or not working, consider using ScriptUp.
Yeah. And they don't do any of that promise of access bullshit. Like, if you pay us X number of thousands of dollars, there's a chance that we may just circulate your script to blah, blah, blah. So they're just about making your story work.
And if you tell them that Draft Zero sent you by using the promo code DZ10, as in the letters D, Z, and then the number 10, you'll get 10% off. Look, just see the link in the show notes with the promo code in there.
And now for front matter?
Isn't this the front matter? Hi, I'm Stu Willis.
And I'm Chaz Fisher.
And welcome to Draft Zero, a occasional podcast where two screenwriters try to work out what makes great screenplays work.
And today we're embarking upon the first in, I won't say a series, but
the first of what is not a series, so the first of possibly one.
It's going to be one of those foundational podcasts, and it's going to be about character choices
and decisions.
And we're going to explain what we believe that distinction to be and how that's a useful craft tool.
And just quickly, the three movies we are looking at are Booksmart, The Farewell, and Wrath of Man.
I just wanted to start off with years and years ago when Stu and I were at film school, Stephen Cleary, and it's been said on the podcast multiple times, but he's said to us that the way the audience understands a character, as distinct to how the writer understands a character, is through their actions and choices were kind of the words, not what they say.
Well, more specifically, their decisions. I can't remember which episode, but I was revisiting our back catalogue in a sense of moment of narcissism. And we talked about how you could actually see how much agency your characters got by just literally writing down all the decisions that they make. And we kind of never, we're 84 episodes in, and we kind of never really delved deeper into choices and decisions.
Well, the reason why we want to do that now is, I guess the series is on character journeys, right? We want to explore different facets of how to dramatize characters either changing or not, or the drama of what a character goes through in a story, right? And we settled on this foundational episode of choices and decisions. I'm going to just say choices as a shorthand, but as we get into it, we're going to start some Draft Zero jargon because you and I we're going back and forth on it, right? Like, you were like, everything is a choice. And I'm like, yes, everything is a choice. But then it becomes a meaningless point to say everything a character does is a choice. Like, if they walk to the other side of the room, that's a choice. If they turn off the light switch, that's a choice. And you had the brainwave as we were arguing with each other on Slack rather than actually, doing our respective paid jobs. You were the one who's like, there's a difference between choices and decisions. And you've since dived into that dichotomy further.
Well, what I ended up doing, I was like, we just need an external party because we'll just argue with each other because that's what we like to do.
We did quote the dictionary.
Well, what does the dictionary say, Chaz?
All right. A decision is a conclusion or resolution reached after consideration. Also, the action or process of deciding something or of resolving a question. As against choice, an act of choosing between two or more possibilities. And the thing that we jumped on there, and that made a lot of sense to us, is because the difference between watching a character make a decision and watching them make a choice is the audience actually being aware of what the character in question, what are the options that they are selecting between.
So that's the dictionary definition. But I was like, look, I think we could get a third party here to help us out. So I reached out to friend of the podcast, author, actual professional philosopher. Apparently there's like, I don't know, a philosophy factory in Hobart, because that's where Damon lives. And most importantly, a swordsman, a fellow swordsman, which is how we actually know each other. And I asked him, like, how as you as a philosopher define a decision? And this is what he had to say.
A decision is a knowing and deliberate choice between multiple possibilities. So typically we will rank those possibilities. We express some kind of preference. This is valued less and this is valued more, and we will choose between them. That is a decision when it is done knowingly and deliberately.
So I think for me, what I really responded to with Damon's philosophizing was this knowing. So it's the character knowing what they're doing. And for me, to give an example, like, so if we have a scene where, say, like, Stu punches Chaz and then you punch me back, right? Even though on one level, you always have the choice to not punch back, it's not a decision if you're doing it instinctively, if it's a reaction. If I punch you and then you take a moment, right, and then we see you punch me back, I think we've seen a decision, okay? So I think the knowingness is really important for it on screen, like for to read as a decision on screen. And so I think that was a really useful distinction from my original observation where everything implies a choice. Because yes, you always have the choice to not do the thing. But on a dramatic level, a decision includes this knowingness. And even though he's speaking more philosophically about, ranking preferences based on our values, I think this idea of character values, that characters make decisions based on what they value, is part of the reason that decisions are so good about revealing who character are, because it's revealing their values, okay, or a change in values. But just to get Damon to further help, because I'm just a pain in the ass and he did set up the microphone for me, I was like, okay, so how does this compare to, a choice? What is a choice, Damon, swordsman/philosopher?
A choice is any selection between alternatives when we are able to select between alternatives. Importantly, a choice need not be conscious. Our bodies are making choices of a sort all the time. It's just that these choices are physiological rather than conscious. For a choice to become a decision, it must be knowing and deliberate.
What?
I just find his distinction harder than the dictionary distinction.
Yes, I mean, he's speaking from a philosophical point of view. But I think this idea that the alternates, when you're capable of it, because he can say there's things where characters are presented without a choice.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Right. Is it really a choice, do this thing or I die? That's not really a choice. Or Damon, when I was talking to him about it, I was like, look, in the end, he's like, the language is useful for commonality. It's the important part is the ideas themselves. And the ideas that we're going to use for this podcast is that decisions have to be a knowing act of choosing between alternates, particularly between choices. And choices as a subset of that is a alternate when there are other options that you are capable of choosing. All decisions involve a choice, but choices do not have to involve decisions. Is that useful as like a starting framework? Because I can see how this applies to all three films that we're discussing.
Yes, but I find that less of a useful hierarchy than the dictionary definition, where the only difference between a decision and a choice is the choice is between identified possibilities, whereas a decision is weighing up different value systems.
For me, a decision in this idea that the character comes to a conclusion of a path of action, that can happen, right? But we do not. The difference is, if it's knowing, then the audience has to understand it's knowing. And I think it's really useful because I think you can have characters that make decisions between possibilities that we're not aware of are possibilities until later in the film, because narrative point of view comes into this, right? That we don't understand that it was a decision, but it was, because we are revealed what the possibilities were later. But I think just going, a decision is a conclusion, right? To choose an item actually isn't that actually that useful. I find that Damon's definition is more useful it sounds more complicated, but a knowing act between possibilities, right?
Yeah.
Is really useful.
But that's the definition for me of a choice, if we're looking at the dictionary. And the dictionary definition of a decision is a conclusion or resolution reached after consideration. It's the same thing. It's that knowing thing. Where I agree with Damon is the exclusion of reactions, right? You've actually, a decision is something that's weighed up.
But you always have the choice not to act, right? So it becomes a decision if it's a knowing choice to act or not act.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think that's always implied that a decision will always be between choices. Okay.
Yes. I think I agree with him fully in his definition of decision. Where I don't agree with him is his definition of a choice. Like, he's seeing a choice as those automatic responses as a choice, whereas I see a choice is the exact same thing as a decision, except where the options are laid out.
So, okay, this may end up being a debate that's worth discussing through the 3 films we're about to talk about.
Yes.
And the reason I think it's worth talking about, and the fact that we're even debating it, is because in terms of the way it's experienced in drama, is that you have 2 experience of it. You have how the characters experience choice and decisions, depending on whatever framework we use, and how the audience come to understand them. So this episode, in some ways, is a follow-up to our Game of Choices episode, which looked at decision making in 2 episodes of Game of Thrones. But what we're exploring is that the audience's narrative point of view, whether ahead or behind or equal with the character when they make. We were using the terminology choice, but I would like to go this decision. When they were making these decisions, we were either given privilege to them, like access to them, or not, or we caught up with them. So in the case of Cersei, we were talking about her decision to blow up the keep. She had made that decision off screen. And it's a clear choice. Like, she either blows up the keep or doesn't. It's a clear decision because that is something that she has weighed. I either do this thing or I don't.
And we also made a similar observation in our main characters versus protagonists episodes, where we were looking at the fighter, and it was clear that the main character in that, Mickey, I think, played by Mark Wahlberg, he was making a series of decisions and choices to drive the plot. But the camera, in terms of narrative point of view, they always cut away from him when he was making that choice. So it felt, from the audience's point of view, it was kind of taking away power and agency through narrative point of view. So yeah, fully agree with you. So, I mean, we originally picked these films, Booksmart, The Farewell, and Wrath of Man, because we wanted to pick 3 very different films and just analyze them through the lens of what decisions and choices the characters are making. And we had this, this plan, this framework, before we even got into this debate around what a decision or a choice is, or whether they're different, because we just wanted to see what could we learn, right? As a broad diving in point. And I think we've learned lots of things. And I do think that these different frameworks of decision versus choice are going to be useful, even if we have separate frameworks for them. For me, the key distinction that I've been looking at in my analysis is, characters are making considered decisions throughout these stories. They are weighing up a variety of options, they're considering them, and they're taking them. But to me, like, my main thesis coming into this is, if you want a more powerful audience reaction, or you want to demonstrate a character, like who they are or how they've changed, it is more powerful when you go into like the classic Snowpiercer left, right, when the audience is fully aware of the options between which the character is choosing. Because any character, like, someone says something to them and they sit and take a beat, they're making a decision about what they're going to say next.
And so it's knowing.
For 100%, it's knowing. But for me, it's not a quote unquote choice, simply because the audience doesn't have access to, do I say this or do I not say this? Whereas it would be a choice if there was a VO and we, got party to that, access to that character's thoughts, and they're saying, right now I could say this or I could say that, and it would have this effect or it would have that effect, and then they make a choice.
The only thing harder than having to tell your super high-powered, perfect, anorexic, rich super sister that you've run out of money is having to ask her to bail you out. I'm just going to ask her. I'm just going to ask her. I'm just going to ask her. Just going to come.
Do you need to borrow money?
No. Can't do it. Can't do it. Can't do it. Can't do it.
So in that amazing introduction to Claire from the FLEABAG pilot, if we didn't have the VO, if all we had was do you need money? No. It's barely even a decision. It's almost automatic. But because of the VO, we have the options available to FLEABAG. And so there's a choice, then there's the decision, and then there's the consequences of the decision. And it's so much more powerful than if, do you need money? No. And for me, interestingly, decisions reveal, using my framework, right, of a decision where the audience doesn't have access to the possibilities, a decision reveals who a character is, whereas a choice where the audience has access to the options available that the character is weighing up shows who a character is not as well. It shows the limit, the boundaries of who they are.
I don't disagree with that, because I think what you're talking about there is characters weighing up values. I think there is always a decision if the character takes a beat and therefore engaging in some kind of knowing analysis. They've always have the choice, in the case of dialogue, to say nothing, to not hit back, right? Connecting it to your analysis and narrative point of view is, and what I was saying earlier, is I think there is the audience being aware of the choices and whether or not the audience, or when the audience understand what the choices were. And that's a separate moment from the decision. Okay. So I think from the framework I'm going to propose, which builds on what Damien's saying, and he's talking from a philosophical level. Yes, he writes fiction as well, but it's like, I just asked him in terms of like decision philosophical frameworking, is I think we can be aware of when characters are making decisions, and we can be aware of when those choices, the decision was between, what the choices were. And I think they're separate things, because as we talk about in Booksmart, and this can transition us into Booksmart, there is a character who's made a decision that we're aware that they've made a decision early on, but we only catch up later to them in the film, right, of what their choices were. Okay. Like, as in what the legitimate choice were, or was the impact of that. And I think this is to do with empathy. The reason I think decision-making and the choices that are presented to the audience are actually so important is I think it's a way of generating empathy.
100%.
Because what it does is something that I'm really interested in lately has been audience questions, right? And it's something we've banged on for a long time, so it's not like lately. But I think decisions are actually a particularly good thing. If we understand, do they take left or right? What is so powerful about that moment is the question of which they will choose puts our audience completely in line with the character. And so this is often why, and we might end up doing a whole podcast on this, like the final choice or the crisis decision, depending on who you are. Part of the reason that it's so common to present characters with choices at the end of the films, do they go left or right, is because it's about aligning us. Whereas as we're exploring in Game of Thrones, how we feel about the character is related to our understanding of what their options were. And that comes back to this idea of values, right? That decisions are a choice between values, right? And it's about saying what the character values. So how about this? The decision is the act, the moment when we see the character or not see the character, make a decision between do the act of deciding what they're going to do. And the choices from our point of view is at what point the audience understand what their choices are.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction. I'm prepared to roll with with that.
I mean, I don't think it's much different from what you were saying. I'm just like, because you were just aligning those moments together, and I think they can be separate.
I agree with you. And where I agree with you 100% is the knowing is important. But the difference for me between, just to distinguish from Damon's language, is he was saying a decision is knowing and a choice is not. Whereas for me, a decision and a choice is both. They're both knowing.
I'm happy to roll with that for this too. From the point of view of a writer and the way that audiences experience a film, unconscious choices do not have as much dramatic possibility. They do represent who the character is and the running condition of the character, etc., etc. But I don't think they have impact in the same way.
Yeah. And that's like my thesis, and Booksmart is going to be a fabulous example of that. Is I'm going to lead with the screenwriting tool that I've identified for myself. I'm going to lead with my learnings, is that if you want a particular character moment to be powerful, let the audience know what they're deciding between. If you put the audience in the narrative point of view of being with the character as they make their decision and aware of all their choices, that creates, like you said, empathy, but also kind of dramatic power.
And I agree with that, because it's about narrative point of view, and the narrative point of view of the audience. We are in a position of empathy with the character. We know as much as they know, and therefore that puts us really inside their experience. So, yes.
We have to go to a party tonight.
What?
Nobody knows that we are fun. We didn't party because we wanted to focus on school and get into good colleges.
And it worked.
But the irresponsible people who partied also got into those colleges.
I'm incredible at hand jobs, but I also got a 1560 on the SATs.
We haven't done anything. We haven't broken any rules.
Name one person whose life was so much better because they broke a couple of rules.
Picasso.
He broke art rules.
Rosa Parks.
Name another
Susan B. Anthony.
God damn it.
Picture this, I'm a bag of dicks, put me to your lips.
Hand sanitizer.
Check.
Chapstick.
Check.
Mace. Listen, it is very important that you keep the safety. Don't touch your eye!
Okay, so Booksmart. I'm going to go to the Wikipedia summary is not as great as a logline as the IMDb one. So Booksmart is a 2019 film. I guess you could call it, I mean, it's a straight up comedy, but a teen high school comedy. On the eve of their high school graduation, two academic superstars and best friends realize they should have worked less and played more. Determined not to fall short of their peers, the girls try to cram 4 years of fun into one night. Directed by Olivia Wilde and written by Emily Halpern, Sarah Haskins, Susanna Fogel, and Katie Silberman. I would just like to make a broad observation. So we deliberately chose 3 films, like from completely different genres, picking them before we knew what we would find. And I think comedy is one of those genres that really has to be much more driven by character choices than other genres. I think drama is probably going to fall into that as well. So like the Farewell might fall into that. But you and I were, when we were having this debate about what's a decision and who's making decisions, I'm like, disaster movies, there's just generally a whole lot of the plot is not being driven by the characters. Right? The plot is being driven by the volcano and the lava and the asteroids and the dinosaurs and the giant robots.
Where in some ways comedy feels like, I don't know if it's driven by a lot of choice. It's often driven by one choice, one really dumb choice that the characters utterly commit to the bit, right? Like Weekend at Bernie's is like, we're just going to commit to pretending our boss is alive, right? Like committing to the bit. And that is actually what they do in Booksmart. They do the metaphorical version of committing to the bit of your boss is still alive. The advantage that Booksmart has over Wrath of Man and The Farewell is it's a buddy comedy. So you can have 2 characters kind of literally vocalizing the choices within a scene, right? Whereas as we joked on our previous episode with Alice Fraser, Wrath of Man is about this like the archetypes of masculinity with like, it's like him not giving anything away emotionally, and The Farewell, as we'll hear, but is ultimately still about Billy's kind of journey. It's still fixated by books. Booksmart is definitely a buddy comedy, and I think that makes it easy and a good place to start. So what you'll notice is that a lot of films will have at the first act turning point is what I think it's even Sid Field, but it's, and I know I don't like Sid Field, and he calls it the lock-in, right? But if you're familiar at all with the hero's journey, you get this moment of like, there's the herald comes along and offers the journey to adventure. It's Obi-Wan or R2-D2 turning up and going blah blah blah, and then Obi-Wan saying to Luke, "You should come and fight," and then Luke saying no, right? It's all about presenting Luke with a choice, right? Which is, do you stay and on the farm or do you go off and fight the rebellion?
You must learn the ways of the Force if you're to come with me to Alderaan.
Alderaan? I'm not going to Alderaan. I've got to get home. It's late. I'm in port as it is.
And they have to kill Aunt Beru and Uncle Owen to push him on to that journey, to take that choice away from him so it's no longer a choice because he's actually made the decision to stay. But that whole beat is that usually that the main character commits to the mission. That's the hero's journey. And Booksmart is absolutely no different. They have their quote-unquote call to adventure, which is, do you want to come to the party? Them debating the idea and then locking in to committing to the decision. So often in a lot of these movies, it's like whoever signs up for the mission, agreeing to go to the mission is the first major decision that the character makes, because the choice is either going on the mission or not, right? But in the case of Booksmart, it's kind of the running thing, isn't it? It's because essentially you've got the 2 characters, Amy and Molly. Molly is the one who learns in the toilet what other people think of her.
Wait, are you guys talking about Molly Davidson?
Yeah.
That girl is so weird. She always acts like she's like 40.
I wish she was fucking 40, man. Women in their 40s know themselves.
No, but she's cute. You know, yeah, I give her that, but she'd probably make you quiz on her SAT analogies while you fuck her.
Dude, no, her vagina's probably stuffed with diplomas. How much you want to bet? That shit's like a filing cabinet down there.
Well, I got no problem with a filing cabinet. I would make passionate sex to Molly Davidson.
Really?
Yeah, I just put a bag over her personality.
Molly's like a butterface for personality. A butter personality.
Yeah.
Right. And then she is the one who discovers that for all her studying, everyone else also got into good grades. Right.
Can I make an initial observation, interrupting you? Because I was surprised to find that when this movie started, there wasn't a lot of choices or decisions from Amy and Molly. It is the second last day of school, and really a lot of their character is revealed not by the choices or decisions that they're making, but by the reactions of other people to them. They have an interaction with their principal.
Ladies, it's the last day. You know, we did it, huh? We got you through high school. Can't we just graduate, head off to college, celebrate this wonderful achievement, and let's focus on getting through the rest of the day without anything
I'm sorry,
horrible
are you shutting the door on
happening,
us? Because that's not settled. We will persist.
They have an interaction with their favorite teacher. They've got their other students around them reacting to them. And we're given insight into who they are by how their world sees them.
Yeah, I'm going to come in because the other thing we were meant to talk about in this podcast, which we got lost in the weeds of arguing on, of decisions, is choice. So unlike us, is consequence, right? Because originally I was interested in this because we've talked about before that plot is like first action to final consequence. And I was like, action doesn't feel strong enough. That I think the way you get to understand your characters, it's the first choice of the character to final consequence. And then I started thinking about consequences in the nature of the stories. And the reason that consequences are interesting is characters make decisions and then you give them a consequence. And the consequence will hopefully present them with another choice between possibilities, and then they make a decision. And then potentially those consequences are strong enough that if they're making dumb decisions, they stop doing it. So here, what we are seeing is that they've made a decision off screen, right, to focus on studying. And what we are seeing, we're becoming to understand that decision through the consequences, through the way that other people treat them.
Yes. So we get an insight into how they see themselves, and we get insight into how others see them, right? But going back to your moment in the bathroom, because it's fascinating, the scene is broken into two halves. Molly is not affected by them revealing how they think of her. She is in the bathroom stall listening to them talk about her.
Her butter personality.
Yeah. And she walks out of the stall, confident, calm, washes her hands, so comfortable in her own skin. And it's only when she learns.
I'm going to Yale too.
What?
I'm incredible at hand jobs, but I also got a 1560 on the SATs.
No, you didn't.
I got in early.
To Yale.
Uh-huh. Oh, Tanner, where are you going to school?
I'm playing soccer at Stanford.
Stanford University. What are you guys talking about?
Stanford.
Stanford University.
Hey, I'm not going to college. I got recruited to go code for Google. I mean, it's not Apple, but the bennies are pretty tight, man, and it's mid-six figures, so I'm not complaining.
Oh boy.
I'm so proud of you.
Oh boy.
It's amazing.
Hey, you failed the 7th grade twice.
That is when she is shaken.
Because what she is saying is that she made a decision to focus on studying in the hope that it would get her into a good school, and it did, but then other people made different decisions and got the same consequence. So I'm going to say it now because I'm beginning to think this is the structure, and then it's how the audience understand these three things, right? You have a choice, which leads to a decision, which leads to consequence, and that's kind of the loop, right? And the consequence leads to a choice, and the way the audience experiences that, which can be the same way as the character, can be in that order, or it can be broken up. So in this case, we've seen they've made decisions, the choice, do I party or not? They made a decision. Not party, focus on homework, leads to the consequences of this. But then they've realized that other people have made different decisions reflecting different values. And as one of the same characters sees, it's like, we do school, it's just not the only thing we do. And so it's making her reassess her value system.
Yeah, because this is where, to me, the first big choice happens, right? Is Molly freaks out, storms out of the school, and her and Amy are sitting up on a hill, and Molly's kind of catatonic, and Amy's trying to sing her out of it.
I'm going to say you now, we've already learned what their choice will be between. They've been invited. Have they been invited to Nick's party?
Yeah, by Ryan.
Ryan. So, yes, it's been clear. They've had the quote-unquote call to adventure, which is usually come to their party, right? And they all kind of dismissed it, and now it comes into this scene.
Yeah. And Molly says,
We are the only assholes who did one.
So her big regret, or her realization that drives the whole film, is that they missed out by only caring about school. Because everyone else has gotten the same rewards that they got, but they didn't only care about school. So what's the decision? They're going to go to the party tonight. And it was interesting because as the scene was playing, I'm like, this doesn't really feel like it's clearly a decision, but I was like, oh, there's not like a series of choices played out here. But it was fascinating to me that at the end of that scene, when they agree that they're going to go to the party, Amy says,
We were going to watch that Ken Burns thing.
The Dust Bowl can wait, bitch!
Yes. So coming back to your earlier definition of choice, yes, I think in this framework, what is useful is we need to understand what the choices were between for maximum emotional impact.
Yeah.
Which was the whole criticism we made of Game of Thrones and Sansa, was that we didn't understand what her choices were between.
Yeah.
We just saw the decision with no understanding of what those characters' choices were at all.
And in fact, we didn't see it even get made. She just arrived. We saw the consequences of her making it.
Yeah, we didn't see the decision. We only saw the consequences so we can infer the decision. But if we see the choices, and if we know what the choices are, and then we see the moment of decision, them knowingly deciding, right, then that engages with those characters and that invests us emotionally with them in terms of the consequences. Because in some ways you could argue that the rest of the film is just the consequences of them making that decision then.
Yes, 100%. And it's one of, I think there's only 2 or 3 moments in the whole film where the narrative point of view aligns and all the options are presented.
Because it's mostly from this point of view, once they kind of lock in to, sorry, I'm using Sidfield terminology. I should just shoot myself. Anyway, like they kind of do their bit, like with the parents, and they lie, and Amy defers to Molly, and they've done a really great job because Amy is always the voice of doubt. You know, it's Molly that makes the decision to go, and Amy goes along with it, but Amy is always wanting to kind of, you get the feeling she would probably be preferring to watch Ken Burns. She thinks she might get lucky. They make the decision to lie, and that's just debated, but it's not a key decision. But, you know, it's like, can you lie for me? Okay. It's not really a knowingly moment of deliberation. But from then on, it's stuff that is happening to them.
So the first thing that they do is they need to find the address for the party.
That's the kind of the MacGuffin is like, we need the address for this party that we weren't invited to.
And a lot of these sequences that they go into, which are hilarious, and I love them, but they're often driven by other characters or events happening to them. Like you said, they've committed to this choice, this decision, and everything else is playing out, and it's not necessarily their choices or decisions that get them into what happens next. So the first person that responds to their text saying they know where the party is Jared. He's only defined as being the wealthy kid, and he takes them to his party where they and Gigi, his other kind of ephemeral, weird, wealthy friend, are the only people on this amazing yacht party that reminded me of something out of Arrested Development. And, you know, they go to this party that isn't a party because no one's there, and it's deeply sad. And then, you know, run out into the car park. And
so there is a moment in between that I want to dissect because I think it's a useful moment for us to understand what we're kind of debating and the choices that the writers the choices we are presented with, the writers, and the decisions we have to make, which is Gigi offers them these strawberries.
She doesn't offer them. She kind of shoves them in their mouths.
Yeah, they could, coming back to this like involuntary body thing from Damon, they could spit them out.
Yes.
But they choose, they make an unconscious choice to eat the strawberries, right?
Try strawberries. Okay.
Not bad.
That's pretty good.
What we learn later, like we as the audience are probably like, Gigi's up to something, but they're unaware of it, right? So I think it's not a decision that the characters have made. Like, even though they have a quote unquote choice to spit them out, and you could see Amy spit it out, right? If we wanted to, the writers have made it so Amy and Molly swallowed them. What we will learn later is that those strawberries were soaked in a psychedelic. But because the characters were unaware of what they were giving, right, it means it doesn't register as either a decision between them. It doesn't, other than the choice between eating and not eating, it's not really a strong choice. If the audience were privileged to this idea, if we knew more than those characters, we would have a different emotional reaction to them. Right? We need to align them with, like, it's just Gigi being weird and shoving strawberries in their mouths, right? So the writers have made that moment not feel like a decision. It's stuff that has happened to the characters. Because in a way, what they're trying to saying is that these characters weren't allowing life to happen to them, right? That they were afraid. Okay, it's in some ways of like being apart, but also not driving things, that they needed to be more open to possibilities, which means they needed to be open to other people's influences.
100% right. So they did, quote unquote, have a choice, but their choice was, do I spit out this strawberry or not? And in the end, I think there's even a line that's like, that's actually quite a good strawberry. I think they...
My point is they've constructed this moment so it doesn't feel like a decision. It's not knowing, and we're completely unaware. Like, other than spitting it out, it's not like there's really... If we say that for characters in a film, there's always the not doing a thing, and just say that's not a possibility, right? In the way that the rules of the world are presented, not doing the thing is not a possibility, then they didn't really have a choice.
Well, and why would you? Anyway, so we get to the second big choice of the film, which is in the car park. Amy wants to go home, right? She's had her party, and she wants to go home. And Molly says their code word, which is...
Malala.
Whoa.
I'm calling Malala.
Wow. You know you only get like one Malala a year.
Yeah, I'm calling it. Full support, no questions asked, you are coming with me.
And there's a clear choice for the two characters. Go home or go to the next party, where they've now got the address from someone. They think they're going to Nick's party. They haven't called the lift yet.
Oh, yeah, yes.
But it's the same choice as they had on the hill. But importantly, Amy wants to go home. Molly doesn't, and Molly is calling in an element of their friendship.
Yeah. So they're escalating it, but this choice of do we go home or do we continue to look for this party is brought back a number of times. It's the same choice, but it's very clearly articulated for the characters and for the audience. So unlike the strawberry, which is I can choose to not, you could just spit out the strawberry. The not doing the thing is clearly articulated as a possibility, right? And I think that's really important.
I think it's similar to the farewell, and we'll get to the farewell, but the premise of the farewell means that every moment of that film is the same choice over and over again.
Absolutely.
And in the same way with Booksmart, every moment of the film could be, should we stay at the party or should we go home?
Every moment of a James Bond film, every moment of Die Hard is, do I continue on the mission or do I turn back? Right? It's the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. So, but there's only 3 beats in this film where it's actually clearly articulated to the audience and to the characters as both of them debating or choosing.
Debating the choices and then making a decision based on the values.
Yeah. So they call a lift, and hilariously is their principal.
And Olivia Wilde's ex-husband.
And they've been given another fake address, and it's like the stereotypical gay drama student / enemy is having a murder mystery party, and he needs more people, so he keeps them on at the party, and that's when the drugs kick in, and they end up on the lawn. Like, all this stuff is hilarious, and if you haven't seen the film, you should go and see it. But the reason why I'm running through it is because a lot of this stuff is happening to the characters at that point. They're not driving, they're not really making many decisions or choices. In fact, they undergo their psychedelic drug trip where they are very firmly without decisions or choices.
Without agency.
Yeah. Where they end up on the lawn, and again, Amy says,
"We're okay. We did it. We went to 2 parties. We did drugs. We can say we went out. Let's go home."
And what is fascinating is that the writers had to change the balance in their relationship in order to get Amy to change her mind. So what happens at that point is Gigi yells out,
Because she loves him.
Oh my God, Gigi, stop doing that.
What did you say?
Molly loves Nick.
Can you please stop repeating that sentence because it's not true?
Molly hates Nick.
Thank you.
She projects disgust to cover up a deep desire.
No.
She's ashamed of being clearly sexually attracted to this guy.
yeah. And it's Amy learning that Molly doesn't think herself worthy of Nick that makes Amy go, no, we're going to the fucking party. So a second debate has happened and they had to change what the characters knew for there to be a different outcome of that debate.
And it also shows us the characters' values. Coming back to this idea, the decision made between choices reflects values, what they value. We see that Amy is valuing Molly's happiness over her own at this point.
And yeah, and it's not just Molly's happiness, it's Molly's sense of self. I know those are two connected ideas, but I think it is an important distinction. I mean, look, how they get to Nick's party is hilarious. There's a wonderful sequence where they, try to hijack a pizza delivery car. And this film is so fucking funny. And I'm not doing it justice here with this analysis.
But this is the kind of thing where it's like, this is a decision of these characters to hijack a pizza delivery person to find the address, but we don't know what the choice is.
Yeah.
And we only see the consequence, which is them in the back of this car. We think they're taking away the experience for the audience because maybe there's like I don't have the theory, the emotional exhaustion, but the narrative point of view is different, right? Because they want us to experience the consequences of their choice, which is how hilarious it is when they do their hair up as if it's masks.
Yeah.
Right.
And to me, like, it wasn't a choice because the audience weren't given, they knew that the pizza delivery people knew where the party was, right? There was a number of different ways for them to get that information, not least of which is going into the pizza shop and like paying someone, right? But they didn't present us with all those options. The characters made a decision and we were landed in the consequences of their decision. And we didn't even see them making the decision.
Agreed. So from a dramatic point of view, as far as the audience was concerned, it was neither a choice, a decision, it was only consequence.
Yeah.
That's kind of useful. Like, they're the three things you can show the audience.
Yeah. Yeah. Now we're cracking.
I think it's also worth pointing at this point, just because it pops into my head, but we have learned, speaking of what are the choices, what was the decision, what were the consequences, we have learned at this point that Amy is going overseas to Africa, to Botswana for summer. Okay. To work with women making their own tampons. So that is a decision that we've been told about that has been made before the beginning of the film. But it's going to start playing into what we're talking about now, which is why it's worth bringing up.
Yeah, 100%. So they get to the party and initially they're really successful at the party. Like, Amy is successfully like growing closer to Ryan, who Ryan is a woman and Amy is gay but has never had a girlfriend and is sexually inexperienced. And
she's trying to and she's out of the closet, but she's trying to suss out whether Ryan's out.
Yeah. And Molly is actually getting really successfully kind of intimate in a high school party way with Nick. So everything's going swimmingly until they separate from their different people and Amy ends up seeing Nick and Ryan making out together. And so Amy realizes, so this is a bit of a dramatic irony, Amy realizes that both she and Molly are going to be heartbroken by this news, and she wants to protect Molly. So she goes and finds Molly and asks her to go home, right? So it's the same choice again, but it's being enunciated again. And Molly doesn't want to go because from her point of view, she's doing really well with Nick and Nick's about to come back and she's going to score and everything's amazing. And Amy doesn't want to have to break Molly's heart. So Amy calls Malala and Molly says no. So there's this huge choice for both Amy and Molly. It's a choice because there's two possibilities when Amy calls Malala. You either say yes or you say no.
And really, we didn't even think it was a choice. The whole point was that you have to agree to Malala. It was meant to be one of those things where it's like, it's not a choice. And then we learn it is a choice.
only if you want to break your friendship, but it had to be so powerful. To me, it had to be a quote unquote choice. It had to be a not necessarily a binary. It doesn't have to be left or right, yes or no. It could be three things, but the audience had to be clearly aware of the options available. It couldn't be like it couldn't be like getting the pizza guy information, right? Where you have infinite options and they're just choosing one and we don't have access to their choices. They deliberately make us keenly aware of what the options are and put us in Amy and Molly's shoes. We know all the information. It's dramatic irony because one character knows more than another. And Molly says no, and it's only that drives them to be honest with each other about the things that they dislike about each other, possibly for the first time in their entire lives.
Are you kidding? No, I've done whatever you wanted all night, and I'm calling Malala, so come with me.
No, I'm not leaving just because you're doing the thing that you always do.
What is that supposed to mean?
Just, you talk a big game, and then you give up just when things get uncomfortable. Like, you jumped in the pool, and now you're sad that you're wet? Like,
that's bullshit, Mal. That's bullshit.
If I didn't drag you to do things, Amy, you wouldn't do that.
You don't drag me. You force me to do whatever you want to do.
What does that even mean?
You decide what we do and when we do it, and then we always have to do it together.
Yeah, I have to decide because you literally decide nothing. Like, I do all the heavy lifting in our friendship. You never take charge.
I take charge all the time.
You never take charge. I always have to push you. Without me, you wouldn't do anything.
I'm going to Africa without you.
Yeah, I encourage your summer abroad.
I'm not going for the summer. I'm going for the entire year.
What?
And it took this to do it. It took a choice to bring that out. It took and it couldn't have just been a decision or something that was happening off screen to bring about that really powerful moment.
No, it leads us into a real position of empathy, and whether it was consciously related to that or not, but the Steadicam shot that Olivia Wilde has chosen to use, it's basically a one-er of Amy getting out of the pool, following her looking for a party for Molly, right into that argument. It's all played as a one-er. And I've often said that narrative point of view is connected to the camera language, right? And that these kinds of follow shots are empathy shots, right? They're about putting us in the position of the characters and aligning them. And so I think the emotional effect of it is that, right? It's to put us in there, and it just turns into this two-shot. It's fabulous bit of directing that is absolutely about reinforcing the audience's experience of putting us in both shoes, because you feel for them both. It makes us very conflicted.
Yeah. And, talking about the directing, and this could have been on the page, but it was also sublimely directed, is that as they're arguing, what they're arguing about fades to music. We stop hearing what they're saying because it's not important. It deliberately takes us away from the words that are coming out of their mouths so that we go, oh shit, these two best friends who the movie has kind of taught us up until now have very little other than each other and mean so much to each other, are tearing each other apart right now.
So Amy reveals this decision that we were aware of was actually a different decision, which is that she's decided to go to Botswana for a year. So we understand that she had a choice so she's chosen to take a gap year. So there's definitely a clear binary. There's two alternates, which is not to take a gap year, go to whatever university she's been accepted into, right? And then she's also made a choice to go for a year, and she's also made a decision. I'm using my own language, but there's clearly a choice. She's made a decision to lie to Molly about how long she's going. So she's told Molly it was only summer and it's actually for the whole year. And lying is really interesting, and this will ultimately connect us to the farewell, because lying implies multiple possibilities. She is a knowingness. Amy is knowingly told Molly the wrong thing, and she could always tell her the right thing. I've decided to go for a year. But we catch up to Amy in this moment. And that makes us feel differently about Amy than if Amy made a decision after this point. Like, there is a version of this, I'm just giving this hypothetical, where she ends up replying to an email that's been saying, yes, I will go for a year, right? She's been like, hey, I know you're only coming for summer. Do you want to go for a year? And she gets this message at the beginning of the film. And at this point in the film, she decides to reply and say, yes, I'm going to go for the whole year.
Can I pitch you a better version?
Wow.
What if in her scenes with her parents, the parents know, and they reveal to the audience that she's been going away for a year. And we get a moment earlier of access of her deliberately hiding it from Molly. It would make us feel very differently about Amy and about the choice and all that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying what the writers did was wrong. I love this. It's such a powerful moment to reveal it.
I don't know if yours is better, but yours creates dramatic irony as opposed to being a moment of decision.
Yes.
Right. So yours is the same decision. It's just that when does the audience know?
Yes.
I'm assuming her parents know that she's going to Botswana for a fucking year.
Yeah.
That's just an example of how they decouple choice, decision, and consequence, right?
Yeah.
Because the consequence, we're not going to see what it is, right? But they decouple our understanding of the choice from the decision. We know that she's made a decision. We catch up, learn out what the choice is, and then also learn that her actual decision was to lie.
And a lot of these could be rewriting tools, right? Like in terms of just taking a step back and thinking about any of your own scripts and any of your own stories, you can look at all these choices and decisions that your characters are making and go, do we couple the audience understanding, like the narrative point of view at this point, or do we decouple it? What if different effects will that have at any given moment? Because as much as like they've chosen for the audience, even though Amy has made the decision in the past, they've chosen for both the audience to learn that information when Molly learns it.
Yeah, so you understand why Molly is angry at Amy. It's not only just aligns us with Molly, just from a narrative information point of view, it's so we don't understand the dilemma. But absolutely, for me, the biggest rewriting tool, because sometimes it's very easy in cutting things out to go, we don't need to see the choice. We just need to see the consequence. You know, the character, like you just literally cut out the process of decision making. You know, the joke that we've talked about, but this structure is repeated, that, you know, you'll never see me play strip poker, you know, in a fireman's hat. Cut to Chaz in a fireman's hat, completely naked, right? Like you've actually taken out the whole in between and it plays as a joke. But in terms of dramatic impact, right, if you want something, you need to understand the choices and see the decision process, the decision being made, right? And then hopefully you'll see the consequences, which is something we may end up talking about more in as we explore character journeys more, because I think consequences are ultimately about what lead characters to make choices. But, you know, this is the third act. This fight here, the decision they make to separate and go their separate ways after they've had the fight leads to the consequences of the rest of the film.
To me, there's a few more decisions in the rest of the film, but even decisions, there's not that many.
There's one big decision for Amy. Don't know if there is for Molly.
Yeah, it's much less important. So the next sequence is Amy actually ends up, you know, in the aftermath of this argument in a bathroom with another girl, Brooke, and, you know, finally has her first sexual experiences, and it's highly disappointing.
It's important to make they also don't present it as a decision. It's something that's instinctive.
Yes. Yeah. 100%.
She just starts making out with her. It's not like the girl was like, come on, make out with me, right? That would have played very differently.
Yeah. And Molly ends up seeing Nick with Ryan, so she kind of understands that Amy was trying to protect her. The cops come to break up the party. Molly is chased out of the party and Amy is pinned in the party with the rest of the group. So that's all happening to them. They're not really making choices. In fact, Molly is very deliberately like dragged with a crowd. You know, it's like against her will. And so the big choice for Amy, you know, it's been leveled at her that she's a coward. Now, I don't really think any of the choices that she's made to this point in the film have painted her as being a coward particularly. She's someone who avoids conflict, and that's why she's, you know, lying to Molly about Botswana.
What is interesting about Amy is we see her as someone who's very principled, and we see Amy as someone I think she legitimately likes. She's not doing this thing because she wants to go to Harvard. I think it's because they're reflected principles. The only thing we see her cowardly about is her sexuality. That's the only thing that the text actually shows us, is that she is unable to go up to Billy and go, hey, are you into girls? Do you want to go out? Which I'm like, I'm not even sure that's cowardly. Like,
so this is where I was like, I don't agree with what Molly is yelling. And this is, you know, going back to our defining thing, the choices that have been presented to us are different about who Amy is as a person than what the text is trying to tell me Amy is as a person.
Like the supertext, there's the subtext of Amy, the text is the film, and then there's the supertext, the dialogue. what Molly is accusing her of being a coward, and the other, the cowboy girl accuses her of being a coward just before, but I think that's a neg. Clearly negs her into making out with her. So
yeah. So anyway, they dramatize Amy's change by she runs out to the cops to create a distraction to let her group of penned friends escape.
I am not a coward. All right, focus up. Wait for my signal. I'm gonna create a diversion.
What? And it is clearly a choice, right? Well, actually, in my own terminology, it's a decision, not a choice, because it's not like we don't know all the options. Amy's got a lot of available options to decide between in that moment, and we're not privy to her decision making.
It's a clear decision that she makes. There's a moment of processing.
Yes.
And it's the kind of thing that a screenwriter would write in. Amy makes up her mind, beat, turns to the others.
Yeah.
Right? I think that's a really good example of them decapitating the choices. And we don't need to know the choices. We need to know she's made a decision. And clearly the decision that we need to know that she's made is between not doing that and doing that.
Yeah. So she runs out and ends up getting arrested. It's interesting that both characters following this big fallout are presented with choices to demonstrate how they've changed. So Amy has done hers. Molly has to choose to get in the car because Annabelle is offering her a lift home. Annabelle, the person that she's resented and slut-shamed and judged, right?
You know, this is why people say I gave guys roadside assistance, right? I gave them a ride home, that's all. Okay, that's not true, I blew them. But it's not like they ran out of gas and I showed up to suck their dick while they waited for help. We hooked up in their car. It makes sense to hook up in a car. I'm not gonna suck a dick at my own home where my father can walk in at any moment. Also, I wanna enjoy it. Fucking sue me.
So she has to, she kind of chooses by getting into the car to be a different person, to stop judging Annabelle. And from there, there's a series of fun, wonderful, character resolutions around bailing Amy out of jail and getting to Molly's valedictorian speech on time and the final resolution between Brooke and Amy. And I'm playing these out, but I kind of feel like from this analysis of the decisions and choices, it's kind of ended at that point. I even felt, interestingly, that they decided not to pose any decisions or choices in the resolution where Amy and Molly come together. It's in the jail scene, right? And they just both have come into the scene already forgiving each other.
Oh, I'm actually here for someone else. I'm so sorry. My mistake. My mistake.
Fuck you, dude.
Dude, you're in full-on jail.
Yeah, I know.
I'm so sorry.
I mean, it's okay. I'm gonna have to pay a fine and go before the judge, but we both...
No, I'm sorry. I know women apologize too much, but in this case, I have so much to be sorry for. I was so selfish.
I was being a coward.
You called Malala.
I lied to you, Mom.
You were trying to save me from seeing Nick rub his boner all up against Ryan.
Oh my God, can you believe that, by the way?
No, honestly, no. I would have guessed that Nick hooked up with Theo before I would have guessed he hooked up with Ryan.
Nick and Theo do have great chemistry.
Okay, so I think the key decision for Amy is, absolutely her proving that she's not meek.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess maybe it's like if she's going to be an activist and she's clearly someone who's quite politically active, that being activist requires you to be active. And so she's going to be like ACAB, like she's prepared to put her life on the line rather than her going, right. So that Amy has changed. So I think Molly's choice is to go back for Amy, right? And I think that is a choice for it is a choice that is shown to the audience that she could choose not to. I think we are aware of what the possibilities are, that she could go without Amy. We might not believe that's consistent with her character to not go, and it wouldn't be, but I think you're aware of that as a possibility.
But let's talk about the dramatization. Molly wakes up, sees on her phone that Amy's been arrested, and the next shot is her at the police station. It doesn't show her considering it. It doesn't show her making a choice. It doesn't show her thinking about it. She's just there.
That's true.
Right? So in terms of the tools that we're talking about, from an audience point of view, Molly has already changed as a character and they're not choosing to represent another step on that journey to change.
Yeah, because she's already had the moment where she's confronted with the truth of herself with Annabelle in the back of the car. Like, it's Annabelle that kind of like calls her shit out. Yeah. Fuck yeah, Annabelle.
Yeah.
Like, I like what they did with her character, because your understanding of Annabelle is is changed by Molly's experience. Like, oh, wow, turns out my classmates were people too.
Well, I love that I thought, they were going to go down the path of like the story wasn't true. He's like, no, the story wasn't true. It's just you guys are all assholes for slut-shaming me about it.
Yeah, I'm allowed to like sucking dick.
You pointed out on my Letterboxd review that the first time I saw this film, I was like, yeah, it was fine, but I don't really get what all the hype is about. And then when I rewatched it for this podcast, I'm like, oh my God, this film is fucking amazing.
Oh man, Emma was like laughing a little bit, and then in the doll scene, she just fucking lost it. And at the end of the film, she literally messaged her like best friend from like when she was 5 years old going, you got to watch this film. And it's good. Like, it was great because I was like, I love Superbad. And obviously Superbad is very male gazy, but it's a great teen sex comedy. Booksmart is better. Only because it's got something to say, right? Like, it's got a whole bunch of commentary. It's not just because it's woke Superbad. It's more interested in its characters, and I think that's actually what we're tapping into, because it's putting you into the characters' dilemmas. Yeah. They end up having a confrontation, the consequence of that revelation. And the fact is, it's a decision of Amy's to reveal it to Molly, to hurt her. And we know it's a decision because she's been withholding it. It's not a choice that we're aware of, but we see the decision and then we see the consequence of that.
And as much as I'm downplaying the end scene, I think it's clearly a deliberate choice that they have already forgiven each other and changed as people and resolved before they get into that scene. Like, if that was two men, they would have to argue it out.
Possibly have a fight on the lawn in the rain, mud all over them.
Yeah. But do you know what I mean? Like, there would have to be the decisions and choices would have to be revealed in that moment. They would have to dramatize the change in that moment rather than having previously dramatized the change and just showing us the consequences of it.
Yeah, because it's true of friendship. It's people, they were hurting each other in that moment, but they weren't committed.
They possibly could have, but what they learned following that moment allowed them to come back together. And they just didn't have to come back together in each other's presence.
Yeah.
So that is as much as the choices and stuff as I've got out of Booksmart through this particular lens of looking at the decisions and choices that they've made.
And look, they're kind of related to turning points, right? So in terms of classic idea of turning points, that you've got a turning point at your inciting incident, I don't think that's often a character choice. In fact, I think that the inciting incident offers the character the choice. In this case, come to the party or not, whatever it is. I think turning points are often not just a single moment. They can be a collection of moments that add up. But then you've got this moment where the characters commit. There's a midpoint, and we've talked about this before. It's the farthest the characters go without changing, or it's where the rug pulls out. That can, depending on the kind of your story you're telling. Alien's got a fantastic midpoint. But the midpoint of Alien isn't a fucking built around character decision. It's literally the opposite of it, right? And then, your lowest point then often creates choices. So in some ways, maybe your turning point is there is a plot event that creates a choice and then your character makes a decision, can be a way of thinking about it, because I think all the decisions that we've identified in Booksmart coincide with those classic act breaks.
They're certainly sequence breaks. I think their second act doesn't neatly fill into two sequences. Like, each party is a sequence. There's Jordan's party, the murder mystery and party with the psychedelic drug sequence, and then Nick's party.
Yeah, because the midpoint's them getting kind of maybe them. Yeah, you're right. The midpoint's either them outside the pizzeria, not knowing how they're going to get to the party, and they're making the decision, which we are not sure what the choice is. We are deliberately, Molly does not tell us who she's calling, right?
Yeah.
Or the midpoint's probably more Amy agreeing to go on. I think that's what the midpoint is. Is Amy turning around and saying, no, we're going to go to the party. Her change in values is the midpoint. And then the lowest point is definitely the fight.
Yeah, 100%. And then it's from the fight, they go like learning until the prison makeup scene. And then everything else after that is aftermath. It's the valedictorian speech and Amy's like farewell to Brooke.
Yeah, and look, maybe you could argue that Molly's she has a look at this speech that she's written, which is clearly, this is maybe the last decision, and it's very small, is that we've already got Jared reading from Molly's speech, and they make jokes about that because he's speaking in her voice.
I am a woman. I am a powerful woman. and I'm ready to take the fists of my femininity to the status quo.
And then she kind of turns up and looks at what she's written and makes the decision to throw it away. Right? And so that is a decision in that sense. It's something that's a possibility. I either follow the speech or I don't, and it's knowing. That's the final decision, the culmination of everything that Molly's learned, which is, oh my God, you people are actually human. Sorry, I don't know you as well as I should have because I'm a judgmental bitch.
But it's interesting. Like, I fully agree with you because she's presented with like the choice of, do I read the speech that I pre-prepared or do I speak off the cuff? But it's a reflection of what's already happened in the past.
Okay, so I'm going to come back to something you talked about, a game of choices, and I think this is a perfect example because we talked about this point of view, right? So we don't, if we know what the choices are, the question is what will the character make? And we can either be behind them, so we don't know what the decision they've made, or we can be equal with them, we can be with them when they make the decision, but we can be ahead of them. And in the Game of Thrones, we're like, there's this thing where you get a sense of like, well, Jon Snow is going to choose the dumb thing because he's Jon Snow, and Jon Snow chooses the dumb thing, right? So we're ahead of the character in terms of we know what they're going to decide. So at this point, we know Molly is going to choose to make up her own speech, right? And throw it away. And it's a recognition. Like, it's us going, oh, yes, we know that the character's change has been demonstrated, but we're aware that the character has changed. It is the moment when Luke turns off the targeting computer in A New Hope. I don't think you ever believe that Luke isn't going to turn off the targeting computer. Something that's more complicated, which is more connected to, like, the experience of this in the moment, is Mills in 7. And we talked about this in Catharsis, and what's interesting is Catharsis part of what makes 7 a really strong ending is that there's a clear choice for the character to make at that end, that binary of do I kill John Doe or not, and they clearly dwell on him making a knowing decision.
Shut up! That's what he wants. He wants you to shoot him.
No! No! You tell me that's not true. That's not true.
Become vengeance, David.
Ah, she's all right. You tell me.
Become wrath.
I may be driven by emotion. Just because it's a decision doesn't mean it's rational, right? And similarly, just because something is subconscious doesn't make it irrational.
The way that moment is shot, I know we're digressing here, but like I've seen that film many, many times. Not recently, but many, many times. And from my memory of it, they dwell in the consideration. Oh. It is, like you say, it's emotional consideration, but because like he points the gun at him, he turns away, he almost gags, there's a flash of his wife's face, and then he like just hardens up and shoots him. You know, like it wasn't like as soon as he knew it was his wife's head in the box that he just turned around and shot him.
They make it they clearly make it a decision in the terminology we're using.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of similar to what Booksmart is playing with, but it's similar, but it's more deliberate. They've made it a clear decision, whereas I think Booksmart and Star Wars are making it as we know what those characters are going to decide before they do.
Yeah.
So they actually kind of just like accelerate through it. We see them make a decision, but it's kind of like because we're ahead of them, they close that gap much more quickly. I don't think you know when you watch Mills with that kind of like, fuck, what's he going to decide?
Yeah.
You actually have Somerset saying, don't do it, don't do it.
This is what he wants you to do.
The choice is presented for the audience.
Yeah, definitely. So here endeth our discussion on Booksmart. And surprise, surprise, dear listeners, this is Chaz from the future, having realized that we have recorded for far, far too long for a single episode. And so we are tabling our discussion of The Farewell and Wrath of Man and anything else that comes into our minds.
So we've made the decision to split this episode.
I guess it's not a choice because you, dear listener, had no idea of what we were doing or what we were thinking when we made that decision. But anyway.
Very meta.
I hope you really enjoyed that analysis or that discussion of choices versus decisions and that analysis of Booksmart. We really go deeper with The Farewell and Wrath of Man. But I guess before we go, Stu, do you have any quick key learnings that you want to take from that part 1?
Yes, I think, and look, we may end up discovering these in part 2 and I'm just not sure where we are in time, but I think what we kind of really doubling down, it's not choices versus decisions. It's decision is the act, okay? And choice, which may or may not involve a choice. And then the question is what the choices, whether the audience is aware of those choices and when they're aware of them. That's kind of the important thing that we're talking about Booksmart and becomes particularly crucial as we discuss The Farewell and Wrath of Man, which is non-linear storytelling. Non-linear storytelling. Nice.
Just like this.
Yes. You?
So I think, yeah, like the key distinction we've had, putting jargon to one side between choices and decisions, is the interaction between a character acting, or not acting, but like doing something, and the point of view, the narrative point of view. How much access does the audience have to the options that character is choosing between? And when you align those, they can create, we saw in Booksmart, they can create a lot of power. And I think what we find in the other two films that we're coming into is that they don't necessarily, like Amy's decision, the power came from when she had already made the decision before the film even started, but it's when the audience and Molly become aware of it all at the same time that power can be generated. So for me, as the big character tool is, if you want to give audiences a feeling of who your characters are and what they're give them decisions. And then if you really, that alignment of giving the audience access to what the characters are deciding between, which I call a choice, like in contrast to Damon, then that can be really powerful. I'm sure it can be overused.
Yeah, well, because like all things, too much similarity, it becomes boring, right? Like sometimes you want to modulate between mystery and empathy and curiosity,
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll see you guys
for part 2.
I'm going to say in a couple of weeks. I'm going to be ballsy and say we'll get the part 2 out in a couple of weeks. I may regret this.
I'm editing part 2, so it's probably going to be done before part 1, Chaz. Ooh. So the question is, are you Amy or you Molly? I think you're Molly, Chaz, in this relationship.
In our relationship? Yeah, I think that's fair, sadly. I'm the less principled but more combative.
Successful?
I'm going to be the next
youngest Supreme Court
justice.
You're going to be the youngest food court justice ever, Chaz.
Thanks as always to our amazing patrons who bring you more Draft Zero more often. If you would like to have more Draft Zero more often, and if you do, I fail to understand you, but thank you. But in particular, thanks to our extra special patrons, Randy, Thomas, Sandra, Crob, Jesse, Garrett, and beyond. Thank you.
You guys rock!
I hope you all feel like arguing with either Stu or myself
about anything on this episode or anything in general.
And you can find many ways of getting in touch with us at our website at draft-zero.com.
At the website, you'll also find the show notes for this and all our other episodes,
as well as links to support us and spread the word for free via a rating and review on Apple Podcasts.
Very important for spreading the word.
Or if you think that what we do here is worth $1 or preferably more than $1, then you can also find links to our Patreon page to support us getting these episodes to you quicker. Thanks.
And thanks for listening.